Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome for a press conference with Canada's NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh. After some opening remarks, we will open it to questions, starting with questions on site, and then we will move to questions on Zoom. Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue à une conférence de presse avec le chef du NPD, Jagmeet Singh. Après quelques remarques d'introduction, nous allons commencer avec les questions sur le site. Ensuite, nous irons aux questions via Zoom. Jagmeet, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nina. 1 in 4 Canadians right now in our country is skipping the medication they need because they can't afford it. You think about what that means. Walking down the street, you see 4 people. One of those people that you meet is not taking their medication, whether they're skipping that medication, not filling out prescriptions, or stretching out their medication. That's a reality that we're living in right now in Canada. And what that means is people are going to get more sick. And we know what happens when people don't get the medication they need and they get more sick, they end up in the emergency room. Obviously, this is horrible for the person that's sick, and it also puts extra pressure on our healthcare system. We know that this is important. That's why we've been fighting for national universal pharmacare for all. The Liberals have been promising pharmacare for 30 years, but have been breaking that promise every year. Justin Trudeau himself has made that promise and has also broken it. And we know that the Conservatives have no interest in pharmacare. They're very close, perhaps too close to wealthy corporations and big pharma. They have no interest in taking on this issue because it's going to upset big pharma. And frankly, that's why the Liberals have been dragging their feet. They've been proposing a plan that pleases big pharma, but is not good for people. And so we've been fighting back. We are fighting because we want to have the first steps of a legislation that lay the foundation for universal pharmacare for all. And we also want to see some first steps to covering medication. We want to cover contraceptives and diabetes medication. And that brings me to the story of Britt. Britt's right beside me. Britt is someone that has had diabetes since she's been young, and she's lived with this illness. She relied on her parents' coverage when she was a child, then her own coverage as a student, and then, of course, didn't have coverage when she was no longer a student. And her number one question about the job that she was trying to find wasn't something about the career or the direction of the work. It was whether or not she would have stable coverage. And now she continues to live in fear. If she loses her job, what's going to happen with her coverage? Her entire life, in terms of being able to live and have access to the medication she needs, depends on having the right coverage. It should not be this way. It should not be that Britt relies on the whims of having the right job and the right coverage to be able to live. Annie, who's also beside me here, is someone who's worked in healthcare as an emergency room nurse and has seen the impacts of people that don't take the medication they need, has heard those stories about people skipping their medication, knows what happens when you do that. You get more and more sick and you end up with severe complications. Not just seniors ending up with severe complications, but younger folks as well that end up with worse health outcomes because they didn't take care of their health because they couldn't afford to. Kingsley Kwok, to my left, is our candidate for Scarborough-Guildwood, also a healthcare worker who has seen the impacts of Scarborough-Rouge Park, has also seen the impacts of healthcare, of workers, of people not getting the care they need and the impacts of that as someone who works in Scarborough General Hospital. So I want to give you a sense of where we're at in these discussions. We've been working hard over the weekend, and we've been fighting hard to make sure that this coverage is there. And so far, we've seen some positive movement, but we're not where we need to be yet. So I want to send a message directly to Justin Trudeau today. You know that this work is important. I've raised this concern directly to you, Justin Trudeau, that you have been siding with Big Pharma, and it's got to stop. We need a plan that's good for workers. And I want you to think about Britt. Think about someone in our country who relies on coverage to be able to get the life-saving medication that she receives. We're standing by the Banting Institute. The Banting Institute is where insulin was invented over 100 years ago. The inventor for insulin said that this is for the world, sold a patent for $1 to give it to the world. Now, people in our country are spending thousands of dollars on their diabetes medication and equipment to stay alive. My message to you, Justin Trudeau, directly is do the right thing. Let's move forward on the real foundation for pharmacare for all. Let's cover contraceptives and diabetes medication to show Canadians that we can do this, that we can lift people out of the fear and worry and uncertainty of not knowing if they have the coverage they need. Let's do the right thing now. Let's do this for working people. Let's do this for Brit. Let's do this for people so they don't have to worry about those two things. They take them off of their plate of all the things that people have to worry about today, given how high the cost of living is. Let's take those two things off the table. That's my message directly to Justin Trudeau today. Do the right thing. Let's cover contraceptives. Let's cover diabetes medication. Let's lay the foundation for pharmacare for all. Not for big pharma, but for real people. I'm going to do that again in French, and then I'll take your questions. Donc, c'est clair dans notre pays qu'on a un grand problème par rapport au coût des médicaments. Une personne sur 4 n'achète pas les médicaments dont ils ont besoin parce qu'ils ne peuvent pas se permettre de payer les factures pour les médicaments. Et on sait ce qui se passe si on n'achète pas les médicaments, si on ne prend pas les médicaments dont nous avons besoin. La réalité ou le résultat, c'est qu'on tombe malade. On a besoin d'une urgence. Et ça, c'est un grand problème. Pour les gens au Québec, ça coûte trop cher pour la science privée. Donc, ce qu'on veut voir, c'est une assurance médicaments universelle, nationale et publique. Quelque chose qui va sauver l'argent, qui va sauver les vies. J'ai parlé avec les gens. Aujourd'hui, j'ai parlé avec Brit. Brit travaille et a des couvertures, mais elle a peur si elle perd son emploi, elle ne va pas avoir accès aux médicaments dont elle a besoin. J'ai parlé avec Andy, qui était ancienne infirmière. Il comprend la réalité des gens si elle ne prend pas les médicaments dont ils ont besoin. Elle tombe malade, il doit aller à l'urgence et c'est difficile. Kingsley aussi, c'est notre candidat en Scarborough, mais aussi un travail dans le domaine de santé. Il sait aussi la réalité. Donc, j'ai un message pour Justin Trudeau. Je suis ici, derrière moi, c'est le centre où insuline était.
Will the Liberals still have your support?
The Liberals will certainly not have our support if they break the agreement. If they break the agreement, they are walking away from the agreement. They'll have to answer to Canadians why they chose Big Pharma over Canadians. They'll have to answer to Canadians why they walked away from the first steps of covering contraceptives and diabetic medication, why they're walking away from this, why they're choosing to break their commitment. They would have to answer that to Canadians, but if they do so and they walk away from the agreement, then we will no longer support them in the House. They can no longer count on our votes.
What does that mean? Will you still be willing to negotiate with them on a case-by-case basis, and it would be status quo for a minority government, or will you force an election?
What will happen is, as I've indicated in the past, we'll return to a vote-to-vote basis, which means and analyze and we'll make a decision based on each vote. There will no longer be an agreement in place, and the Liberals can no longer count on or take our support for granted. We will go vote to vote.
Our next question comes from the Globe and Mail.
Hello, thanks for taking our questions. The NDP posted a video referencing insulin and birth control, as you've talked about, but they also talk about anti-anxiety medications, cholesterol medications. Are these drugs also included in your demands to the Liberals?
So I'm not going to get into the details of what we're negotiating, but I can tell you generally the two or the three major things that we've been fighting for. One is legislation. Folks know about that. That was originally in our agreement. Because they missed the deadline, we said we expect more from the Liberals. And so we put forward two things concretely. That's contraceptives and diabetic medication. Those are the two things that are on the table right now that I can share with you, and that we're fighting to make sure legislation, it's good for workers, good for people, not something that pleases big pharma. And that's what we're fighting for.
Okay, so you can't be more specific about any medications that you're asking for. I mean, they're in a public NDP video, so people might be watching that and think, oh, I might get my anti-anxiety medication covered by this.
What people should know is that what we've laid out clearly in two press conferences, we've laid out our demand for contraceptive coverage.
Sorry, I have to keep.
And we've laid out our demand for the coverage of diabetic medication. Those are two things that Canadians should know that we are fighting for concretely. That's why we're here today in front of the Banting Institute. We're putting a message to Justin Trudeau. This is your chance to do the right thing. Support people, not big pharma, and bring in two classes of medication to be covered to give Canadians some hope that they can see real coverage for themselves and for the future.
Our next question comes from CBC.
Hi, this is from Stephen Hoff, who's in Ottawa. It's a two-part question.
Sure.
The first part is what should the next steps in the ArriveCan investigation be? And the second question, what do you hope to see in the online harms legislation that is expected to be tabled soon? And do you have any concerns about free speech issues connected to that legislation?
Sure. Start with the ArriveCan. This is a very serious matter. We've seen so far personally, stories of kids that are harming themselves because of what happens online. I'm sure you've read stories of kids even go as far as self-harm and suicide from online harm. There are some horrific examples of what happens to kids: exploitation, sexploitation, being harassed, being bullied. It is very serious. And social media platforms are not doing what it takes to protect kids. So in this regard, I am focused on saving kids' lives, keeping them safe, and protecting them. And we need legislation to do that. With regards to children, that's what I'm focused about. I'm not focused about anything else. I want to make sure that kids are protected online, and that is my sole concern. So that legislation needs to be very focused on protecting kids. And I would defy any other politician that says anything contrary or is in any way opposed to a bill to protect kids from online harm. I don't see anyone that could oppose such a thing.
Our next question comes from iPolitics.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Apologies if you were already asked this earlier. I'm a bit late to the party. But considering we're about a week away from the deadline when it comes to the pharmacare deal, what's your message to Canadians about whether they should have any faith in the Liberals actually delivering on this deal? Or can you give us any update on how things are going right now?
So I said, and I welcome the opportunity to say this again. My message to Canadians is we're fighting for you. We want to make sure that you don't have to worry about the cost of medication. We want to make sure people like Britt, who have had to lean on the support of their parents to be covered, to cover the cost of their diabetic medication since she was 2 years old, then relying on student coverage, and then the whims of being able to find the right job that has coverage. That should not be the case. And so to Canadians worried about that, I want you to know I'm fighting for you. I'm fighting to make sure diabetic medication is covered and the contraceptives are covered as two first steps and to have legislation in place. And I have a message to Justin Trudeau. This is the opportunity to do the right thing. You have between now and the 1st of March to bring in legislation that's good for workers, that's good for families, that's good for people, not something that pleases Big Pharma. And you've got the opportunity to make sure Brit doesn't have to worry that if she loses her job, she's not going to have medication coverage. That's what's on the table right now. That's the opportunity in front of us. And my message to Justin Trudeau is, let's get this done. Let's make sure Brit doesn't have to worry again in the future.
And just my follow-up. You said you had a meeting with the Prime Minister earlier this year, and you said if that March 1st deadline wasn't met, there would be serious repercussions. What are those? What are those repercussions?
Certainly. So, and this is again directly to Justin Trudeau, but to all Canadians. If Justin Trudeau, if you miss this deadline again of March 1st, then you would have broken the agreement. You will be walking away from the agreement. You'll be walking away from diabetes coverage. You'll be walking away from contraceptive coverage. You're going to be walking away from Canadians. If you walk away from the agreement is done. You can no longer count on our support for any of the bills or any votes moving forward.
So we're going to turn it over to Zoom for a round of questions before coming back to questions on site.
Certainly.
Bonjour tout le monde. Donc, on va prendre maintenant les questions en ligne. We will take questions from Zoom. Nous allons commencer avec Valérie Gamache de Radio-Canada. La parole est à vous.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh. Je voudrais vous entendre sur les négociations justement avec Justin Trudeau, avec le gouvernement libéral. Comment ça se passe? Est-ce qu'il y a des discussions à tous les jours? Avez-vous reparlé à Justin Trudeau, vous, au cours de la fin de semaine? À quel rythme se font ces négociations-là?
Merci pour la question. Je peux vous donner quelques détails. Notre équipe, on a travaillé pendant toute la fin de semaine pour négocier, pour avoir des discussions par rapport à notre entente. Et on a eu des discussions, je peux dire qu'on a vu des mouvements positifs, mais on n'est pas là. Et ça, c'est pourquoi j'ai dit encore, j'ai besoin d'une rencontre, une autre rencontre avec le Premier ministre et je envoie un message aujourd'hui que vous avez un choix maintenant. Vous pouvez choisir les gens, les travailleurs, les familles, les gens comme Brett, qui a besoin de médicaments pour diabétiques, ou vous pouvez continuer de choisir les grandes entreprises pharmaceutiques. Ça, c'est votre choix. Mais si vous ne choisissez pas les gens, ça veut dire que vous allez briser l'entente. Donc, l'entente est brisée. Vous ne pouvez pas prendre pour acquis notre appui dans aucun vote. Donc, ça, c'est le choix. Et je veux qu'on fasse le travail nécessaire pour aider les gens, qu'on a un projet de loi qui crée la Fondation pour l'assurance médicaments universelle et qu'on donne l'espoir à Brett et des autres gens qu'on va couvrir les médicaments. Ça, c'est ce que je veux faire. Et maintenant, le ballon est dans le cours de Justin Trudeau et les libéraux.
Et quand vous regardez les options qui sont sur la table, est-ce que, par exemple, pour ce qui est des contraceptifs et des médicaments pour le diabète, il y a une ouverture et en contrepartie, il y a peut-être moins d'ouverture sur cette notion de régime universel?
Je peux dire qu'on a eu des discussions positives. Donc, ça, c'est pourquoi j'ai dit que on a vu des mouvements positifs pendant le week-end. Donc, ça, c'est un bon signe. Mais on n'est pas arrivé jusqu'à une solution complète ou finale. Donc, ça, c'est pourquoi j'ai dit que maintenant, j'ai mis un défi devant Justin Trudeau. Il n'y a pas beaucoup de temps qui reste. Donc, vous devez faire le travail nécessaire pour arriver à la solution. Et c'est pourquoi je demande une autre rencontre. Et je dis clairement que vous avez jusqu'ici, d'ici à mars, le 1er mars, pour finalement accepter notre offre qui était presque finale pour une fondation, pour la création d'un projet de loi qui va créer la Fondation pour l'assurance médicaments universelle et pour couvrir ces deux classes de médicaments, le contraceptif et les médicaments pour les diabétiques.
La prochaine question viendra d'Émilie Bergeron avec la presse canadienne. Émilie, la parole est à vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Singh. Vous avez parlé de mouvements positifs dans les discussions. Vous venez de dire à ma collègue Valérie Gamache que c'est un bon signe. Donc, finalement, parce que ça fait plusieurs semaines que vous dites en point de presse, vous rappelez l'ultimatum, la date limite du 1er mars. Donc, depuis plusieurs semaines, vous êtes donc plus optimiste êtes-vous plus optimiste que il y aura une entente qui sera trouvée à temps là, avant le 1er mars et qu'il y aura le dépôt d'un projet de loi et qui répondra à vos autres demandes aussi. Êtes-vous plus optimiste?
Merci pour la question. Je pense qu'on est plus proche que dans le passé. Comme ça, c'est pourquoi j'ai dit que ça c'est un bon signe. Et oui, je suis reconnaissant qu'il y avait des mouvements positifs. Mais on n'a pas arrivé à la solution finale. On n'est pas là. Donc, ça, c'est pourquoi je continue de mettre la pression. Je dis que on n'avait pas beaucoup de temps qui reste. Ça, c'est pourquoi je mets le défi devant Justin Trudeau encore. Vous avez d'ici le 1er mars pour arriver à la solution. Et ce qu'on demande, c'est clair, couverture pour le contraceptif et les médicaments diabétiques et une projet de loi qui crée la Fondation des Nations Médicaments universels et publics. Et encore, je veux rappeler la raison pour laquelle on fait tout ça, c'est pour quelqu'un comme Brett, quelqu'un qui a peur qu'elle va perdre son emploi et ça veut dire qu'elle ne va pas avoir de couverture pour ses médicaments. Donc, ça, c'est quelque chose on doit éviter. On ne doit pas avoir une telle situation où les gens sont assez dépendants sur leur travail pour avoir la couverture nécessaire pour continuer à vivre. Donc, ça, c'est la question qui est devant nous.
Vous avez parlé de discussions intenses au courant du week-end, mais est-ce qu'il n'y a pas des discussions entre vos équipes, entre vous et les libéraux, à tous les jours, à plusieurs moments, à chaque jour, puisque la, la, la semaine qui commence, la semaine prochaine, ce sera la dernière semaine de séance de la Chambre des communes avant le 1er mars. Donc, le seul moment où le projet de loi que vous espérez pourrait être déposé. Donc, à quelle fréquence les prochaines réunions vont se dérouler, puis se déroulent en ce moment, outre la fin de semaine passée, là. Vous avez déjà parlé de ça, mais c'est quoi le prochain rythme là, jusqu'à temps qu'on se rende à la dernière jour de séance où le projet de loi peut être déposé?
La raison pour laquelle j'ai parlé des discussions pendant la fin de semaine, c'est pour montrer comment c'est urgent pour nous. On est sérieux, on est prêt d'avoir des discussions tout le temps parce que c'est important. On veut faire le travail, on est prêt de continuer le travail. Donc, ça, c'est pourquoi aussi je continue de mettre la pression parce qu'on est ouvert à continuer les discussions, on est ouvert à continuer le travail. Et encore, je dis, c'est au gouvernement libéral de maintenant finir le travail, d'accepter ce qu'on a demandé et d'aller de l'avant. Donc, on est prêt de faire plus de travail, on est prêt de continuer les discussions, mais c'est important que les libéraux fassent ce qu'il faut. Et ça, c'est pourquoi j'ai encore mis ce défi devant Justin Trudeau. C'est notre opportunité maintenant de faire les bonnes choses pour les gens et vous devez le faire.
La prochaine question vient d'Hélène Buzetti avec les coops de l'information. Hélène, c'est à toi.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Singh.
Bonjour.
J'ai écouté votre discours qui explique là, l'importance du diabète, la contraception, etc. Mais je ne comprends pas pourquoi vous avez sélectionné ces deux médicaments-là plutôt que d'autres. Il y a plusieurs autres maladies qui sont graves, comme par exemple le cholestérol. Pourquoi spécifiquement vous concentrer sur ces deux médicaments-là en particulier?
On a choisi les deux médicaments. Je commence avec les contraceptifs. Je sais qu'il y a une menace, une peur pour les droits d'avortement, les droits des femmes, les droits des personnes de choisir comme ça. Et on a voulu renforcer ce droit parce que le droit n'a pas une significance sans avoir accès à ces droits. Donc, accès aux contraceptifs va vraiment améliorer ou renforcer ces droits. Donc, ça, c'est une raison pour laquelle on a choisi les contraceptifs. Aussi, la Colombie-Britannique a montré comment c'est possible de le faire. Ils l'ont fait en Colombie-Britannique. Donc, on peut continuer avec ce même momentum. Et la diabétique, c'est quelque chose, je suis ici où on a créé les médicaments pour les diabétiques ici au Canada. Donc, c'est quelque chose qui est vraiment proche aux Canadiens. C'est quelque chose qu'on a créé ici dans notre pays. Et c'est toujours un grand problème pour les gens. Et c'est une dépense pour les familles qui est tellement difficile et vous devez les dépenser pour vivre. Donc, on a choisi ces deux médicaments. On pense que c'est un commencement et ça montre qu'on peut le faire. Et pour nous, c'est important pour pas seulement parler de l'importance de la science médicament, mais de montrer comment on peut le faire pour donner d'espoir aux gens, que vous pouvez croire en nous. On peut livrer les marchandises. Et ça, c'est pourquoi on a choisi deux éléments concrets pour aider les gens.
OK. Et en sous-question, j'aimerais savoir concrètement comment, admettons que vous obteniez ça, là, les contraceptifs, le diabète, comment ça fonctionnerait, par exemple, au Québec? Il y a déjà un programme d'assurance médicaments qui couvre ces médicaments-là. Alors, comment ça viendrait se superposer au régime québécois spécifiquement?
Ça va prendre du travail à faire. C'est quelque chose qu'on peut faire. Ce qu'on veut réaliser, c'est que ces deux classes de médicaments sont couverts donc par le gouvernement fédéral en travaillant avec les provinces. Et puis, ça va enlever un élément de coût pour le système. Donc, où il y a déjà de couverture, comme au Québec, il y a déjà des dépenses, on peut analyser comment on peut ajouter des financements pour couvrir tout le monde. Ça, c'est un travail où on doit travailler avec les provinces pour y réaliser. Et c'est important que de faire ça pour toute la science médicaments. On doit travailler avec les provinces, mais en particulier avec le Québec, parce que le Québec a déjà un programme, mais aussi parce que la situation spécifique du Québec. Donc, ça va prendre du travail, mais c'est quelque chose qu'on peut faire.
Next, I have Tessie Sansi with the Hill Times. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Mr. Singh, I'm going to ask you to repeat in English. I believe you already answered my question about why why choose contraceptives and diabetes drugs as the drugs to, really focus on.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So it's obviously very difficult to choose where you start, but we wanted to show that this can be achieved. So we want to start somewhere. For contraceptives, we know there's a lot of worry and fear about the infringement on women's right to choose, on people being able to make that decision. And so we wanted to show that it's not enough to just have the right. The right is meaningless without actually access to the right. And so this is a way of showing that we can strengthen access and strengthen the right. So contraceptives for that reason, to show strengthening of the right for women to choose, for people to make that decision in their lives, and to give them access to that right by having access to contraceptives. It's also something that the province has done, the NDP government in BC, and they've shown that it's possible. And so we want to build on that momentum. The second choice around diabetic medication, we're standing in front of the Banting Institute, which is where diabetes, where insulin was invented. And the inventor sold a patent for $1 because they wanted this to be a gift to the world. And now people are still spending thousands and thousands of dollars out of pocket on diabetic medication. So we want to show that this is another area where we can move forward and cover that medication. And Brit's example is a very powerful example. Brit has lived with diabetes her whole life, pretty much since she was 2 years old, relied on her parents' jobs coverage, and then her own coverage as a student, and then was in a period of time where she had to make a choice, not for the advancement of her career, but to find a job that actually had good coverage and good benefits so that she wouldn't have to live in fear that she couldn't afford her medication. And now constantly has to make that choice, that her job is primarily a vehicle to keep her alive through the coverage rather than pursuing her dream or pursuing what she wants, maybe even starting her own business. None of these things are really on the table. And it shouldn't be that hard. It shouldn't be that way for people. So we thought this is another area to show how this could work, how it could save money for people and improve outcomes. We know when people don't take their medication when they're living with diabetes, they end up having severe consequences, renal failure, maybe ending up on dialysis. So the risks are very severe. That's why Andy shared some of his story with me, that he's seen the impacts of people not taking the right medication and how healthy or how their health deteriorates when he was an emergency room nurse, and he's seen those realities. So that's why we decided to move with these two concrete examples to give Canadians some hope. We can get this done, it's save money for people and improve their health.
Thank you. If you were to walk away from this agreement, you would be walking away from influencing other measures on electoral reform, seniors care, housing, etc. Why is this the issue that could end this agreement?
Well, I want to flip that and say if the Liberals break their agreement, they're walking away from it. They're walking away from diabetes coverage. They're walking away from contraceptive coverage. They're walking away from the work that's being done here. That's their choice, and they'll have to answer that to Canadians. We've made it really clear where we stand. We've run on universal pharmacare. We have run on covering contraceptives. We've actually made our position very clear. What's not clear to Canadians is where the Liberals stand, because they promised and broken that promise. They've said things and then backtracked. So where they stand is unclear. Where we stand is very clear. If Canadians want pharmacare, more New Democrats will make that happen. We've really been unequivocal on this. The Liberals have to answer that to Canadians, why they have been so all over the place on these really important questions. So again, I put it back onto Liberals. It'll be their decision to walk away. If they break their agreement, they're walking away, and there'll have to be consequences. We can't let them break their commitments and have no consequences. So that's why there will be the following consequences that we laid out.
Next, we have Christy Kirkup with the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning. My question is, we at the Globe reported last week that the federal government was looking at contraceptive medication and diabetes medications in these talks. And so I'm just wondering, why is it that you're calling on the government to proceed with funding the medications that the government seems to have agreed to fund, or is this just posturing?
Well, no, they've not committed fully to diabetes, and that's why we're putting that on the table now. We want them to fully commit to that, and there are elements that we've not achieved yet, and that's why I'm making it very clear that they've got to the deadline to deliver, and that's why I made it clear. I'm sending a message to Justin Trudeau. We've had some positive steps over the weekend, and we acknowledge that. That's why I've said there's positive movement, but we're not there yet, and we need to get there. And really, this is going to come down to Justin Trudeau delivering on these things. So I've said I need a follow-up meeting, and I'm putting that défi that we said in French, I'm putting that challenge directly to Justin Trudeau. This is your opportunity to do the right thing, to follow through on your word and to deliver for people like Brit. So we're expecting the government to do that, to make sure people no longer have to worry about the cost of diabetes medication, and that there will be legislation that lays a foundation for universal pharmacare. That's what we're expecting, and the government has until the 1st of March to do so.
And just as a follow-up, I appreciate you don't want to negotiate in public, although you are having a public-facing press conference. So I'm just going to continue to ask as much as I can. But on you talked about the fact that on diabetes, they haven't essentially agreed to the full suite of medications that the NDP would like to see. Can you just tell me what the hang-up is there? Is there a specific drug? Is it around Ozempic? What's the holdup there?
Well, it's certainly not around Ozempic. I'm going to say that right off the bat. But I can't get into the details. But what we're looking for is real coverage for people that are living with diabetes, real true coverage, and that's not yet been committed to. And we can't get into more details. But Justin Trudeau and the Liberals know what we want. We made it very clear. Canadians should know we want something that's good for workers, good for people, good for families. The Liberals have been dragging their feet for a long time and been siding with Big Pharma. We know that's the case. We saw that with the body that sets the medication prices and the resignations at that body who resigned because the government was siding with Big Pharma instead of allowing them to do their work to lower the cost of medication. So they've had a track record of siding with Big Pharma, and we're saying this is not the time to do that. This is the time to side with people. This is the time to bring forward real legislation that's going to move us forward for universal pharmacare. And this is the time to make sure we give Canadians some hope with real coverage for diabetes medication as well as contraceptives. So that's what we're fighting for.
We will now send it back to on-site questions. Alana, it's yours.
Okay, we have time for one more round of one question, one follow. The first question comes from City News.
Thank you. Mr. Singh, you've stood here today wanting to send a defiant message to Justin Trudeau, and yet you're not willing to let the government fall. How do you square that circle for NDP supporters and members who have wanted you to be firm on pharmacare?
Oh, we're absolutely firm. And what our members said really clearly is that if the Liberals break this element of the agreement, then the agreement should be broken. That's what's going to happen. The agreement will be broken by the Liberals, and we will then walk away from it. And the government knows that. They're worried about that, and they should be. And so we're very firm that we expect this government, expect Justin Trudeau to deliver by the 1st of March. And we've laid out what we're expecting. Legislation to lay the foundation for universal pharmacare, so people don't have to worry about the cost of medication, and starting with 2 classes, contraceptives and diabetes medication.
But yet again, you're still not willing to let the government fall. Does that not undermine your message?
No, we're not going to presuppose a confidence vote. We're not going to presuppose a vote on the budget now. But what we're saying is that we'll go vote to vote. The agreement before indicated guaranteed support. That will no longer be there. And so we'll return to what is a normal minority government setting, where each vote will be evaluated and we'll make a determination in favor or against based on the vote.
Our next question comes from the Globe and Mail.
Hi, Mr. Singh. I was hoping to get your reaction to Pierre Poilievre's comments today about, female spaces should be exclusively reserved for females, not biological males. He was asked about transgender people in sport, in change rooms and bathrooms. What do you make of those remarks?
So the context of the question, I understand, is about the safety of women. Well, clearly Pierre Poilievre doesn't care about the safety of women because he hasn't spoken to what women have talked about when it comes to their safety. What is clear in our country, the threat of violence to women comes from men in our country. Violence against women is perpetrated by vast majority by men against women. And what women have asked for, women who are working in those spaces to keep women safe, is more funding for shelters so that women can leave violent situations, domestic violence, they can leave and go somewhere safe. Well, just recently, Pierre Poilievre voted against funding women's shelters in December. So I'd ask him, how does he answer that question? If he truly cares about the safety of women, what women are asking for is more funding so they can get out of violent situations and go to a shelter, yet he voted against funding, additional funding for shelters. What women have said that they're concerned about is harassment and violence perpetrated by men. In sports, they're worried about coaches, male coaches that exploit and commit sexual violence or other forms of violence against women. That's where we need to address the existence of violence, the discrimination that women face, and in terms of pay equity. That's an issue that women have talked about when it comes to sports, that we're not compensated or paid the same amount. Those are the issues that actually matter to women. And for Pierre Poilievre to ignore the glaring, serious threats of violence against women and not address those real serious concerns, and in fact vote against funding shelters, shows where he really stands.
But you address that substance of the question, like, he's saying biological should not be in.
Yeah, so I think it's important to look at the context. He was asked the question in context of keeping women safe. I think this is a problem with what Pierre Poilievre does, is that instead of, you've got serious and ample evidence of what women are faced with when it comes to their safety, like the real threats of violence against women, which we're at epidemic levels right now. Like women's experts are saying we're at epidemic levels of violence against women. It shows you how frivolous he is, that he is ignoring that, which is being called an epidemic of violence, and not addressing what would support women in that case. That just shows that he's not serious. He's not serious about actually protecting women. If you've got clear and ample evidence that the real causes of violence against women are from male partners, when you know that the real threat against women in sports is discriminatory pay, where women aren't paid enough, and violence by coaches against women, if that's the real serious concerns that women are raising and you don't address that, it shows that Pierre Poilievre is not serious. And so I don't want to go down his lack of seriousness to a question that deserves and merits a real serious response.
That concludes our press conference for today. Thank you.
I appreciate
Thanks.
to the extent